So something pretty crazy has happened at the Euros. There's been a player that was suspended by UEFA for the quarterfinal and the semifinal. And I just to say off the top, that sucks. That turbo sucks because the player's Mary Demirol. Not because the player's Mary Demirol, but specifically because Mary Demirol plays for Turkey. In Turkey are finally, at long last, the dark horses that they've always been promised to be, right? The Turks are here. They're at the gates of Vienna trying to conquer Europe again, like Ottoman Empire history throwback. If you know, you know what's up, homie. Anyways, the Turkish national team has made it to the quarterfinal, and Mary Demirol was a very key part of that. Mary Demirol scored the two goals in the round of 16 victory that Turkey was able to pull off against Austria. It was a 2-1 win. It was an absolutely fantastic match. But some crazy stuff has been going on around Mary Demirol over the last couple of days. There are just insanely varying opinions as to what the reasonings are for these things that have happened, right, from one side or perhaps the other, in this case, which would be UEFA or Turkey, right, like the Turkey representatives and so on and so forth. But what we do know is Mary Demirol is suspended for 2 games. So let's take a look at how we got here and kind of what happened. Now, first, Mary Demirol, being the incredibly important player that he was for Turkey in that game against Austria, had a lot of opportunity to be in the limelight, right? He scored both goals, right? They were a couple of set-piece goals that Mary Demirol scrambled in. If you're not familiar with the player, he's a center back who was good enough to earn himself a massive paycheck in Saudi Arabia. He's a center back that has played at the top level of the game for some time, and he's one of the best players on the Turkish national team. You wouldn't find anybody that's willing to make an argument with that. But over the course of him being like in the limelight of the match, he did this symbol. This is a picture from AP News. We're going to be using AP News and Reuters for this in terms of building the background of information, making sure that, you know, everybody kind of understands what happened here. And if you don't know what AP is, it is the news association, and Reuters as well does this, that builds a news wire that goes to like all the major news outlets on the planet. The news wire that provides kind of the basic information behind lots of stories. I feel like that's by far the best thing to use for a story like this, where there's going to be a lot of strong opinions. There's going to be a lot of divided opinions as to what happened. But this is the picture from the AP News site of Mary Demirol doing this symbol, right, or this hand gesture, I guess I would call it. It is, and I'm going to quote here from AP News as to what this is. It's a sign with each hand that is used by Turkish nationalists and associated with the Turkish ultranationalist organization, not going to try and say that, which is more widely known as the Grey Wolves. Right, so it is a hand signal that is basically it is very often associated with this group called the Grey Wolves. Now, if you're thinking if this is some sort of extra political group, it's not. The Grey Wolves were founded as a youth wing of Turkey's far-right nationalist movement, or MHP, which is in an alliance with the current president of Turkey, Erdogan. So he has to build a coalition to, you know, form the Turkish government, and this group, the Grey Wolves, is a friend of a friend, basically. They are the youth wing of a far-right nationalist party in Turkey, which is part of Erdogan's coalition to run the government, basically. So this is a hand signal that is tied into an actual political institution. In Turkey, it is one that even AP points out has been involved in a significant amount of controversy and has had allegations that have kind of followed it around. In the decades following its founding in the 60s, the group is accused of being in the involvement in politically motivated violence. So we're looking at a group that has had this kind of controversial bit swirling around it. And if you're thinking at this point that you're looking at this kind of hand signal that's associated with a political party, well, then what was maybe the reason for the level of response from UEFA? Well, AP helps us out there. And if you're wondering why this has become such a thing, and it's snowballed to the point that Mary Demirol is now suspended for 2 knockout games at the Euros, that's where Reuters comes in. It points out that the entire group, the Grey Wolves, is outlawed in France. That in Austria, doing the hand gesture that Mary Demerol did at the game, right, is banned. So we're looking at multiple European countries where this gesture is banned. I mean, literally two countries that border Germany, where the Euros are taking place, where this gesture is not legal, right? That doesn't necessarily make UEFA right in this case. Now, I'm not trying to put one country's laws above another here, but it does point out the level of controversy that this hand gesture has achieved, right? It is something that, especially if you're an American like me and you're watching this from the outside, more people are more familiar with and likely have very strong thoughts formed behind. And now that you have some context behind it, it's time to dive into the match itself, where Mary Demerol basically does this, and then he amplifies it, right? He goes on Twitter and he tweets out, this is well before the ban, right? This is on July 2nd, I believe, day of the game, right after it. He tweets it out with how happy is the one who says he is a Turk, which is, it's like this saying that kind of goes along with the Grey Wolves as far as I can tell, right? It's this saying that goes along with it. So he tweets this out, massive audience, right? 625,000 likes on this on Twitter. Now, obviously on Elon Musk's Twitter, it's like 500,000 of those are probably bots, right? But you get the idea of the type of amplification that this sort of thing got on the internet. And not just the internet, talking mainstream TV. He gets on, he's doing an interview, right? The first thing he says is, first of all, I'd like to say this, how happy is the one who says he's a Turk, right? So Mary Demerol didn't just throw up the hand signal. He was amplifying it and kind of leaning into it right after the match, right? He was, I don't want to say digging his heels in, because I don't even think Mary Demerol realized what this situation was going to turn into, but he was certainly kind of embracing it and making sure everybody knew that this was something that he did, which is where I think UEFA actually got pissed off. Like, if I'm trying to figure out where UEFA decided to finally dip its toe into legitimately suspending people for political, cultural, social statements that are made on the field, right? Because they'll fine people. I mean, that's been happening over the course of the Euros. Honestly, even at the point that we are in the story right now, I wouldn't have been stunned if I didn't make a video about it, if it was just one of those things bubbling under the surface. There were a couple of incidents of this sort of nature that happened at the Euros already, where it just kind of fell off to the wayside, right? Like, there was a fine, nobody really talked about it, not too many people cared particularly. But this one, I think UEFA felt like it needed to act, because Mary Demerol was like really leaning into it. He was making sure everybody knew why he did it, what he did, and what he wanted it to mean, right? Or at least what he wanted it to represent, right? And we're talking about him wanting it to represent something that in neighboring countries to Germany, right, in UEFA countries that are represented by this football association, a thing that is banned or either highly restricted. There's also something really, really telling that is in the same Reuters article, where the interior minister of Germany said that the Grey Wolves are under surveillance in Germany. So this is one of those groups that's being tracked by essentially German intelligence, right? So this is, for this to be happening in the Euros in Germany, obviously is going to be getting people's attention. And then when it came to my attention for the first time was when that interior minister started to talk about it. She started to really blow this up. She said the symbols of the Turkish right-wing extremists have no place in our stadiums. And she said using the European Football Championship as a platform for racism is completely unacceptable. So she grabbed onto it in the same way that Mary Demerol was kind of leaning into it to represent what he wanted to represent. She kind of didn't back down either, and she decided to add fuel to that fire. She decided to step in and be like, actually this, right? And so that set the stage. At the point that the German interior minister's involved, now we're going to need to see UEFA do something. What I expected at this point was a fine to the federation, right? Maybe $100,000, something that really makes it look like UEFA did something, but didn't actually affect the flow of the tournament. Because we're talking about suspending a player for a quarterfinal and a semifinal in a way that is going to permanently affect history. Right? I mean, Turkey has to make the final for one of its best players to be on the field. again. For whatever reason, that's when UEFA decided to like actually drop the axe on this guy. But the reasons they gave, they didn't make as much sense because I feel like UEFA did have a layup here, right? They had the easy route, like the easy road they could have taken to suspend Mary Demirol, where all they have to do is say we just don't want any sort of political representation on the field of any kind. They didn't have to wade in the same way that the interior minister from Germany waded in. And I want to be clear here. I'm obviously not the most educated person when it comes to modern Turkish politics, so I'm not here to talk about modern Turkish politics. My general approach is, don't hate groups of people, only hate individual people like Greg Berhalter. That's totally fine. What's up, Greg? Hope you're fired by the time this comes out. No offense. You seem like a really nice guy. But you get the idea. But the UEFA statement just it missed that layup and decided to really go all the way. This is what they said when banning Demirol. They said, for failing to comply with the general principles of conduct, for violating, this is what the suspension is for, right? For failing to comply with the general principles of conduct, for violating the basic rules of decent conduct, for using sports events for manifestations of a non-sporting nature, and for bringing the sport of football into disrepute. That's like a pretty clear statement here from UEFA that, like, hey, even though this is the symbol of a friend of the leading party of Turkey, like, hey, this like doing this sort of gesture is just going to bring football into disrepute. Like that is strong language from a federation that, like an organization that is normally hamstrung by pretty obscene amounts of bureaucracy, right? Like they've gone all out. And of course, Turkey responded immediately to this, right? They Omer Shalik, who's apparently a spokesman for Erdogan's party, he came out and said that it was an extremely wrong decision and said that UEFA's decisions cast a shadow of political influence over football. Which honestly, I don't know who's in charge of all of these spokespeople. That's just another brick, right? Like that's just another. There was an easy layup here for this dude too, right? Because if your point is that UEFA's decision has cast a political shadow of like political influence over football, UEFA didn't start it, right? Like Mary Demirol did start it. Nobody made Mary Demirol do this on the field. UEFA was just reacting to that. You know what I mean? Like UEFA was just reacting to what Mary Demirol did on the field and then kind of doubled and tripled down on, right? So Mary Demirol started the political side of things in this case. All Omer Shalik has to do here is just say, we support our players expressing themselves any way that they see fit politically, and we think it's ridiculous that UEFA would restrict that, right? That statement would go hard. That statement would land. They would win the exchange, except it seems like UEFA missed the easy out, and Turkey's spokesman for the ruling party has kind of missed the obvious layup as well. Turkey's foreign minister said that this has reinforced the view that there is an increase in the tendency to act with prejudice against foreigners in certain European countries. Like, same as modern Turkish politics. I'm not wading into European politics here, but it is obvious, as somebody that is as chronically online as I am, that there is much more conversation about immigration. So this is a better play here from Turkey's foreign ministry, if I'm keeping score of the argument, right? That they're leaning into that conversation and saying, you're going after people with different views and so on and so forth, right? But the entire exchange doesn't quite make sense to me between the two sides. And the biggest result of the decision is this is going to be incredibly galvanizing to not only the Turkish fans, but like the tournament itself. It's going to create almost an us versus them. The Grey Wolves have called for Turkish fans to make the sign in the stands. So UEFA has basically just thrown a bunch of gasoline on a fire that they were trying to put out in the first place. It's like accidentally dropping a bomb when you thought you were dropping a bucket of water. And in the other direction, Mary Demirol's he's gone after this in a way that I don't think anybody else has before, and he might end up hurting his team as a result, right? Because as this Twitter user points out, this is not the first time that somebody has made gestures on the field, right? Jude Bellingham is like a false equivalence to me. Like the dude grabs his nuts and then kind of sort of apologizes for it. He's still got a 1-game suspension, which I didn't even know that was a thing. He gets to pick the match he's suspended for over the next year, but sure, that works. And he also, it wasn't a political gesture. It was a mildly obscene one. Dusan Tadic also apparently did something over the course of this tournament But as far as I'm aware of, he didn't double and triple down on it in the way that he did before, and he kind of just did it after the match in front of a camera. There's other famous examples like Xherdan Shaqiri, right? But that was actually at the World Cup, and we know FIFA's not going to be acting the same way UEFA is. So like that's just a whole different conversation, right? Because people confuse the two all the time, but FIFA and UEFA are very, very, very different animals. So I think basically everybody involved in this situation is kind of is blown this up in a way that is pretty wild to watch. Because no, I don't recall anything reminiscent of this. Nothing else like this really comes to mind. But my main takeaway from it is I'm just sad that it happened. Right, like regardless of all of the logistics and all of the different things that we've talked about going into this whole decision process for UEFA and what Mary Demirol did and whether it was right and whether it was wrong, and at the end of the day, we're just hurting one of the great underdogs of this tournament's opportunity to continue to make that run. Right, because Mary Demirol is one of the best players, and now he's just not going to be there unless Turkey makes a miraculous run to the final, and that just sucks. And the fact that on this video, I'm talking about this, right? Instead of what has been a couple of great international tournaments with Euros and Copa America, both in their own way, as I've talked about that other video. Then that's the sad. It's cast a pall over the match between Turkey and the Netherlands tomorrow, and I'm going to be at that match. So maybe I'll make another video talking about what actually goes down. But it is definitely going to be on the top of a lot of people's minds, and particularly on the top of the mind of the Netherlands front line, because they will not be having to go up against Mary Demirol. That sentence makes sense? I don't even know. Sucks that this sort of thing happens.